No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations. Hey there. Did you know that we have a newsletter? Just imagine if you could have one of your favorite ethics professors send you a list of things to reflect on, think about, practical actions with which to experiment, all on your way to sorting through what it might mean to live a good life. Well, that is the NSC Notebook. I riff on themes and topics related to the show and our guests. Sign up for my NSC Notebook today at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
Imagination is the capacity to host a world other than the one that is in front of us.
That's Walter Brueggemann, considered by many to be one of the leading theologians of the 20th century. Professor Brueggemann passed recently at the age of 92, and I've been remembering the occasions, as have so many, I had privilege to spend with him. Like the Hebrew prophets whom he spent a career studying and interpreting, he never flinched at indicting communal injustices or voicing searing critique of our paltry collective imagination.
My judgment is that we now live in the United States in a totalism of market ideology in which nothing is imaginable outside the reach of the market.
And yet he always held that a new imagination, through the grace of God, was possible. Today's episode, a glimpse back at Walter Brueggemann doing what Walter Brueggemann did best, along with clips from two of the interviews I had the privilege to conduct with Walter over the last 20 years. All coming right up. It's summertime, and that means I'm now planning some of my summer adventures with my lovely wife, Laura. But wherever summer takes us, we all need nourishment that keeps up with our daily adventures. So I'm quite pleased to have just learned about cassava. Here's my experience so far, that the cassava whole body meal shake first tastes great. I must say, I thought it might not be possible, given that it is chock full of amazing stuff like 26 vitamins and minerals, 85 plus superfoods and nutrients, all to keep your body and mind nourished all day. I love me some coconut, so I immediately tried the coconut acai and was honestly surprised how great it tasted. I was also especially pleased to see that the 25 grams of protein in each serving is plant-based. So fill your day with cassava. Go to cassava.com and use code ENDEAVOR for 15% off your next order. That's cassava.com, KACHAVA.com, code ENDEAVOR for 15% off. Lately, my lovely wife, Laura, and I have been trying to clean up the way we do a lot of our chores and errands to simplify our lives. And so one of the ways we've tried to do that is to clean up the way we shop for groceries. And so recently we gave Thrive Market a shot. And honestly, we're a big fan. You can get the same high-quality brands you love, but for less and without compromising your standards. They actually ban over 1,000 ingredients that are still allowed in U.S. products, and the site is super easy to shop. You can filter by diet, like gluten-free, paleo, keto, low sugar, vegan, so you're not wasting time reading every label. It's not just food. Thrive has supplements, household items, and clean beauty too. All vetted and all way more affordable than you or I expect. And the shipping, fast and carbon neutral. Head over to thrivemarket.com/endeavor to get 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift. That's thrivemarket.com/endeavor, thrivemarket.com/endeavor. Hello, friends. One of the things I've taught students for many years now is that one of the most important things they can do is pay attention to their meta habits. Big habits that leave lots of things in their wake, and that this is key to living life well. For centuries, the cardinal virtues were thought of as just such meta habits, profound practices that have a disproportionately large impact upon your life. The four cardinal virtues: courage, temperance, prudence, and justice. They were considered essential to a good life, but today we hardly talk about them. Most people can't even name them. That's why we're launching a special 4-part series exclusively on NSE+. In this series, I'll take a deep dive into these virtues, what they mean, why they matter, and how they shape a meaningful life. Think of it like a private college course, except it's way practical. Join us on NSE Plus to start listening today. Sign up at nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSE Plus. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. Walter Brueggemann was one of the most celebrated and productive biblical scholars of the past century. He passed from this life on June 5, 2025, at the age of 92. Brueggemann was a prolific author who wrote more than 100 books and a revered professor at Columbia Theological Seminary. He shaped how generations of pastors, theologians, and lay people engage with Christian scripture. His best-known and groundbreaking book was entitled The Prophetic Imagination. Brueggemann insisted that the biblical tradition of the prophets depicted both sharp, incisive social critique on the one hand, paired with a beautiful, compelling imagination of new possibilities on the other. In place of the oppression, greed, and injustice systematized by various imperialist forces, the prophets imagined the seemingly impossible possibilities of compassion and kindness and justice. A world not run by visions of scarcity, which legitimates the powerful piling up greater wealth for themselves at the expense of those without, but a world enlivened by a shared abundance and plenty. Today's episode seeks to honor the memory and work of Brueggemann. We'll do that by sharing selections from a compelling lecture he gave on totalism. In that lecture, he lays out one of his classic critiques, indicting the prevailing totalizing vision of our own day that increasingly brooks no dissent, which claims increasing control even over our imagination. And yet, he also continues to point us toward new possibilities. In addition to some selections from that lecture, we'll also share selections from two of my public conversations with Walter. One, an interview about that lecture, and two, an earlier interview I did with Walter about his life's work. Here's the introduction to the lecture from Walter in 2018.
I take the word totalism from Robert Lifton, who has studied the absolutizing regimes of National Socialism in Germany and the war machine in Japan. Lifton understands a totalizing regime as one that wants to gain a monopoly of technology and a monopoly of imagination so that nothing is thinkable or sayable or imaginable or doable outside of the totalism. The totalism may be coercive in a way that punishes any dissent, or eventually it may gain such hegemony that it comes to be regarded as normal and there really is no dissent. So my judgment is that we now live in the United States in a totalism of market ideology in which nothing is imaginable outside the reach of the market. Thus, the market has morphed from a venue for the exchange of goods to a regulatory principle that governs all social relationships. As a result, social relationships are monetized, persons are cast as commodities, and inevitably there are dispensable persons in a monetized system. The ideology of the market touches everything. It seeks to assure the good life measured in marketable goods. It depends on a strong military to assure the disproportionate flow of goods, and it relies on a doctrine of exceptionalism to legitimate a guaranteed life of endless satiation as a gift to God for God's chosen people. In order to test the grip of that totalism that is intolerant of dissent, one only need to try to critique the U.S. military or U.S. exceptionalism in any local congregation that I know. You cannot do it, and you must. While I speak in large generalizations, it is a fact that this large sweep of totalism trickles down into individual lives and the way in which social relationships are formed. I suggest that the liturgies that sustain this ideology nurture us and our children into a false sense of desires. It is necessary to evoke false yearnings because the satiations on offer must be the kind that can be delivered in commodity goods, so that the supply of consumer goods functions to generate its own demands. And the outcome is a set of hungers and appetites, computers, the next phone, cars, drugs, cosmetics, what Paul terms the desires of the flesh, the purchase of which keeps the monetized system afloat. And anyone who suggests that these are not the real desires because we are made for other desires represents a threat to the ideology. The preferred mode of communication for the totalism is unambiguous prose in which all signs of playfulness are eliminated. Such language maybe has its origins in the mathematical precision of Descartes. It is the great skill of the memo to communicate clearly and allow no wonderment or generative thinking. And a memo may take the form of orthodoxy or whatever. The practice of clarity and certitude assures a capacity for control and predictability. It is easy enough to see, moreover, that the church has imitated or colluded with the totalism by reducing the mystery of the gospel to flat certitudes in creedal reductions. That is why in the budget crunch of schools, the arts go first. That is why the church can quarrel about syllables, trying to develop formulae of certitude. That is why historical criticism aimed to banish ambiguity from the biblical text. That is why the great mythic hymns of the church have been traded in too many places for one-syllable praise hymns. You know, those are 7-Eleven hymns, 7 words 11 times. That is why dominant trends of Western thought have been inimical to imagination, because imagination insists that it could be otherwise.
Note the phrase Brueggemann used there, formulae of certitude, that we have so desired certitude. We've so desired to have something nailed down, or platitudes or textual claims that we can say we know. And while a sort of hankering after certitude at one level seems quite an understandable human tendency, here Brueggemann insists that this tendency has been, he said further, inimical to imagination, which led me to this question following the lecture. My friend Britt Norval pointed me this afternoon to a quote by the poet Chris Wyman. He says at one point in his memoir, My Bright Abyss, he asks, "What is poetry's role when the world is burning? Encroaching environmental disaster, the relentless wars around the world have had, it seems, a paralyzing effect on much American poetry. It's less the magnitude of the crises than our apparent immunity to them. This death on which we all thrive, that's spinning our best energies into esoteric language games. There is some fury of clarity," he says, "that's much needed now. But it sometimes seems that we're anxiously waiting for the devastation to reach our very streets, as it one day will. It most certainly will," he says. So with his question of what's poetry's role when the world is burning, and your suggestion of this sort of envisioning the preaching task as a poetic one, it seems like we can ask the question, really, though? In the midst of all this, are we supposed to take preaching that seriously? How would you kind of respond to what Wyman puts out there?
Well, if we don't take it seriously, we're out of business. So that's a thought. If what I've said about the totalism is roughly correct, and we're not going to vote on it, what the totalism wants to do is to shut down all dissent. And you can see it happening, the way in which the right wing has taken over the courts and everything else. And poetry is an act of huge resistance against that. I almost never spend a weekend in a congregation that somebody doesn't hand me a poem they've written. And it's usually women. It's usually people who are not on the top side of the totalism. So it makes life porous, and it's a refusal of closure. And we now live in a society of people who think you can do closure. Everything is at stake in insisting otherwise.
Somewhat related to that, in your first point about the force of totalism, you had this line where you said you were talking about the necessity or the task of critiquing militarism and nationalism in our churches. And you provoked us with this line, you cannot do it, and you must. Is that a line mostly just about courage?
Well, it's a line about realism about budgets and all that. I'm very serious about thinking in most churches I know you cannot do it. I worship in an Episcopal church, and my preacher understands all of this very clearly and will not do it. And I understand why he won't do it. And I think he's getting to the point where he knows he must. If we decide to do this in any sustained way, we are breaking with the American tradition that churches ought to be big, and are making a decision that it's more important that churches be faithful, because very much of the big part of the church isn't participatory in the mission anyway. I don't take that lightly. I know about institutional realities, but I think these are questions that we increasingly have to think about.
So how do you suggest we go about envisioning doing such tasks in a way that's not immediately discounted? Because, for example, put you in most churches in the Bible Belt,
Yeah,
there's going to be one simple response to you.
I know that.
You're a socialist.
I know that.
So how does one subvert the ease of dismissal?
Well, I think two things. First of all, I think whatever work you do about this, you do in small study groups. You don't do in the public meeting, because in small study groups, people presumably have wanted to be there, and they didn't happen in accidentally on Sunday morning. The other thing is that you have to do a long-term education of showing that every text has a public dimension. And people don't know that. And people don't know that because we've taught them a very reductionist gospel about me and Jesus. So it really has to do with thinking through our hermeneutical perspective, so that we are always showing how texts are doing systems analysis. And it isn't about me and him. So I think you have to make the case about that kind of analysis of texts before you do anything frontal about our contemporary crisis. That's how my mind works about it. And I don't think that's easy.
Yeah. And finally comes the poet. You noted the crisis of interpretation the preacher faces in our culture, which has either dismissed or controlled the text. In the open lines of prophetic imagination, you argue the contemporary American church is so largely enculturated to the American ethos of consumerism that it has little power to believe or to act. Revised edition 2001. Again, you say the enmeshment of the United States church and the raging force of globalization, the easy accommodation of church faith and practice, consumer commoditism, makes the urgency of prophetic consciousness palpable among us.
Well, that would mean that I haven't had a new thought in 40 years.
Thank you. I can move on now. That's what one of my friends in grad school said. The way you become a great scholar is you write a dissertation and you write it over and over again.
That's right. That's right.
So do you feel even less hopeful 18 years even after that in the changing situation in the United States, or where do you see some hope, or where do you see only despair, or where is that for you?
I see modest hope because I think more and more people are aware that this isn't working. I think people don't know what to do, but people know we can't keep doing this. I think people know that. I don't think people want it talked about, but I think people know it. I mean, the simple recognition that middle-class people know that it's not going to be as good for their grandchildren as it is for them. What's wrong with this picture? It's because all the wealth is monopolized.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our In Memoriam episode on Professor Walter Brueggemann. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in the episode. Also, we're releasing the unabridged versions of the Brueggemann lecture and the interviews on NSE Plus. So if you're not yet a member of NSE Plus, you can go to our website at nosmallendeavor.com and click on Join NSE Plus. There you'll get additional content every month along with other special perks. You can also find links to some of the source material for this episode on our YouTube channel and can find links to those specific videos in the show notes of this episode. Coming up, more from that lecture from Walter Brueggemann. We are most excited to announce that we'll be having our second NSC Plus book club with an author on June 26 at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Professor Rebecca DeYoung will join us to discuss her book, Glittering Vices. It's a great book. Order your copy of the book and mark your calendars. If you're not yet a member of NSA Plus, join at the link in the show notes or visit nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus. Show up with questions and get ready to sit in on a great conversation. Welcome back to our In Memoriam episode, remembering the work and witness of Walter Brueggemann, who recently died at the age of 92. We're sharing selections from a lecture Walter delivered in 2018, along with several interviews I conducted with Professor Brueggemann over the years. In that lecture, Brueggemann laid out the withering critique that we now find ourselves in the midst of a totalizing regime. Here, Brueggemann is playing off the work of Robert Lifton, who had studied the German Nazis and the Japanese war powers. Lifton defined a totalizing regime
as one that wants to gain a monopoly of technology and a monopoly of imagination so that nothing is thinkable or sayable or imaginable or doable outside of the totalism. The totalism may be coercive in a way that punishes any dissent, or eventually it may gain such hegemony that it comes to be regarded as normal and there really is no dissent. So my judgment is that we now live in the United States in a totalism of market ideology in which nothing is imaginable outside the reach of the market. This ideology is funded by a text that is powerful and demanding, even if it is mostly kept hidden. The recurring text behind the ideology of the market is a conviction of scarcity. There is not enough to go around, so that economics becomes the study of the distribution of scarce goods. Scarcity, in turn, begets fear of not having enough, of being left out, and that, in turn, becomes greed that sets one neighbor against another in competition for the same goods, so that neighbors become threats. And the sequence of scarcity, fear, greed eventuates in a near readiness for violence as is necessary to maintain one's advantage over another, thus the gun culture. This narrative of scarcity, fear, greed, violence is as old as Pharaoh in the books of Genesis and Exodus. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had all the food in the world, but he had two nightmares about scarcity. The one who had the most is the one who dreamed of running out. These two nightmares in Genesis 41 evoke a policy of accumulation and monopoly that eventuated in the violence of slavery. Pharaoh's policy, moreover, is aided and abetted by Joseph the Israelite, who forgot who he was to sign on for Pharaoh's nightmare policy. That recurring text of Pharaoh, of course, is on the mind of Jesus, most particularly in the Gospel of Luke. In that gospel, we have the parable of the man who builds bigger barns because he didn't have enough yet. In Luke 16, we have the rich man who would not share a crumb with the poor Lazarus. One task of Jesus via Luke is to expose and to critique the greed system of the Roman Empire that taxed the peasants of Galilee in order to assure surplus wealth at home base in Rome. Thus, in Luke 19, in a replay of the sellout of Joseph to Pharaoh, Jesus confronts Zacchaeus, who is a tax collector for Rome. He invites Zacchaeus back to his Jewish identity as a son of Abraham and away from the scarcity, fear, greed, violence system of the Roman Empire for which he had signed on. That recurring narrative has become the narrative of modernity. In the 17th century, Descartes sought sure certitude that the old tradition could provide and found it in individual reason. And along with Descartes, we get Francis Bacon, who championed the modern idea that the creation is a usable commodity. Does this sound contemporary? Is a usable commodity to serve the needs and wants of human persons who are to be the masters of creation, so that people now speak of the Anthropocene, the human-centered world. John Locke, in the next generation, made the case for private property that led to laws of enclosure, whereby the property of the wealthy cut off the poor from the resources they needed. And belatedly, Adam Smith championed the notion of a self-regulating market system that would lead to social well-being. These pioneers of modernity pushed social theory in an individualizing direction that negated the old traditions of neighborliness. These advocates of modernity were not evil men, but in subsequent appeal to them, their theories of private reason, private property, and private monetization have been hardened into absolute doctrine. As a result, many people who have never heard of Descartes, Bacon, Locke, or Adam Smith, many people who have never heard of him, like Ronald Reagan, rely on their interpretive construction of social reality that in modern time reiterates the recurring narrative of Pharaoh of scarcity, fear, greed, violence. These advocates of modernity, moreover, imagined that they were objective thinkers with pure reason, without any recognition of their context. So what happened is that white male European authority became objective arrogance packaged as white racism, so that white European males knew the best and knew the most, and that in turn led to harsh colonialism and patronizing missionary work. That ideology that exercises hegemony among us is supported by important theological underpinnings. That theological underpinning is as old as Cotton Mather, the early great Puritan theologian who made the case that the American story of white Europeans was a replay of the biblical narrative of coming to the promised land. Like the ancient Israelites killed the Canaanites, so white Europeans regularly killed Native Americans and reduced blacks to hewers of wood and drawers of water in order to sustain economic privilege. The notion of chosenness depends upon an anemic God whose function is to bless, as in God bless America. This God does not do anything, but does not need to, because with God's blessing, we can do all things ourselves. Above all, God does not judge, except, of course, pelvic matters that never touch the claims of market ideology and that never question the governing notions of scarcity. I submit that the tacit God of this all-American religion is an effective reiteration of the idols known in Psalm 115. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of our hands. They have mouths, but do not speak, eyes, but do not see. They have ears, but do not hear, noses, but do not smell. They have hands, but do not feel, feet, but do not walk. They cannot make a sound in there. They can't go like this. If you got a God that can't do that, and then the psalm says, and those who make them are like them. We become like the idols we make, passive commodities without agency. Yes. The market ideology wants us to be passive and without agency, disengaged from the public process, with our energy channeled to consumer satiation. The liturgy of TV ads continues to assure us that the right commodity will give us the good life. And we have become so tolerant of that steady assault on our imagination through these ads that we are fully recruited for the notion that things make life good. Even the advertising geniuses have not found a way to commoditize social relationships, though ads for Cialis and dating sites come close to being able to sell relationships. Now, if one considers the recurring narrative of scarcity, fear, greed, and violence in its modern expressions, we can see where our current market ideology as totalism is rooted and how it is sustained. I assume it is clear to you that this narrative in its recurring and modern forms is the governing ideology of our society, and it is the narrative with which white folks come to church, both liberal and conservative. That ideology among us has led to an economy of extraction wherein privileged whites regularly extract wealth from vulnerable non-whites, from slavery to low wages, to payday loans, to rigged tax policy, resulting in a hierarchy of wealth that robs society of wealth under the rubric of the American creed of wonderful success at the expense of the neighbor, that funds palliative care that does not risk the system. We may be very sure, I suggest, that for most people with whom we preach, conservative and liberal, they are largely contained in that totalism.
It's not clear to me how the last 7 years would have changed how Brueggemann made his point there, but his critique of both liberal and conservative led me, in the interview following, to ask this question. You mentioned several times tonight that both liberal and conservatives in the church are contained in this totalizing, same ideology. Talk more about that, because I think a lot of people assume that those are so very far apart from each other.
Well, first of all, I think that totalism is so powerful that it contains us all. But I don't want to be a liberal who bashes conservative Christians, because I mostly live with liberal Christians, and most liberal Christians I know are very good about social justice as long as it does not critique the system. Because very many liberals are really well off and have a great stake in the system. So our thinking about justice basically has to do with rearranging things in the capitalist system rather than doing a neighborly critique of the system. So there are real limits to that way of thinking. So I think that progressive and conservative Christians have different strategies for negotiating our ambiguity about the totalism of the gospel.
But what then? If the so-called totalizing regime sweeps up much of the political spectrum into its wake, what then? What are we to do? Back to the lecture.
The preacher's response in a context of totalism is to imagine and speak a word from outside the totalism that contradicts the totalism and that asserts livable reality outside the totalism. Imagine that. Imagine how hard that is. Imagine how impossible that is, because totalism has established the claim that there is nothing outside the totalism. But that is exactly what it takes, imagination. Imagination is the capacity to host a world other than the one that is in front of us. And each time we preachers take up the task, we join the chain, we reimagine, and we re-articulate outside the totalism. This is a world not generated by the totalism and not indebted to the totalism. It is the daring declaration that there is indeed something truthful that the darkness has not comprehended. Those dangerous words sound like judgment to the totalism, but they are acts of hope. They are dangerous because the totalism does not believe that a response of abundance, generosity, peacefulness, and neighborliness could ever come among us, because it's so unlike the totalism.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our In Memoriam episode on Walter Brueggemann. If you missed a portion of this interview or would like to have access to the complete unabridged version, you can follow our podcast wherever you listen. We're going to take a short break, but coming right up, we discuss Walter's formative years, some key intellectual awakenings he had through those years, and how he views truth-telling as subversive obedience. Hey friends, Lee Seacamp of No Small Endeavor here. Hey, would you like to expand the community of people talking about the things you like to talk about? Here's an easy way to do that. And I would be most grateful if you were to do so. Go over to your favorite podcast listening app, click on Reviews, and leave No Small Endeavor a glowing 5-star review. Tell folks perhaps about some episode you liked in particular, and tell folks what you like generally about No Small Endeavor, the topics, the dashingly handsome, articulate host, or whatever it is that floats your boat. That will help more people find us, which will expand the community of people talking about the things you like to talk about, especially when you make it one of those 5-star reviews. Thanks. Welcome back to No Small Endeavor. This is a special In Memoriam episode on Professor Walter Brueggemann, who recently passed at age 92. The first time I had the privilege to do something publicly with Walter, he was likely in his 70s, and I was a young 30-something rookie professor. This was something like interviewing a rock star for me in those days, still early in the process of learning to hone my interviewing skills. It remains a special memory, which began this way. The one thing I did want to note is that between the time I read one paragraph online that said you had written 60 books, I read on the back of a book that came out just this year that you had written 70 books. And I think the most important question I wanted to ask is, have you read all of your books?
Only the ones that are interesting, which is a limited number.
Can you identify certain fundamentally important experiences you had as a child that kind of led you to where you have gone in your work?
Well, I grew up
in Nebraska and Kansas in an intensely church family. The church was really the horizon of my life. And my father was a kind of a mentor to younger pastors who were around him, so that younger pastors were in our house all the time. And I found them to be the most winsome and attractive and clever people that I could have imagined. And I think that was a huge magnet for me. My family says that when I was in seminary, the first year I had to do field education in the settlement house downtown in St. Louis, and my assignment was to run a club for 7-year-old girls. And my family judges that's why I went to graduate school, so I didn't have to do that anymore. I went to church summer camp for a number of years, and that was a compelling vocational force in my life. It's hard for me to distinguish the parts of that churchy context, all of which came together vocationally for me.
At what point then, so you go into seminary, and at what point do you begin to be captured by the biblical prophets? When do you snap onto that and say, there's something I've got to keep following there?
I think my seminary teachers, the best teachers I had were in Old Testament, and the prophets were central to their teaching. But I majored in college in sociology, and my major sociology teacher was really a Christian prophet. He knew a lot of sociology, but he also had this incredible passion for justice, and I think I was into that before I got to the Old Testament prophets. The other thing is that my father was a very poorly paid preacher. It's hard to say, poorly paid preacher. I think that led me very early to justice questions, because I knew early on that he was being treated unjustly. And I think that's the trajectory of my life from that, which, of course, fit very well with the prophets then when I finally got to them. Yeah.
What would you say from kind of that college and seminary experiences forward have been key, let's take it maybe in two parts, key intellectual turning points for you? What kind of philosophical or theological significant turning points have informed you, and how did that happen?
Yeah.
And second, what are key turning points perhaps personally in your own experience, in your own faith experience?
Yeah.
As you've gone?
I grew up in the tradition of Reinhold Niebuhr. He was in the same German sect that I was in. And I can remember as a college sophomore, I read Moral Man and Immoral Society. And it was so shocking to me that I sat down and read it again. That was a huge wake-up call. Then when I was a young teacher, I got on St. Louis radio for a call in about Vatican II, about which I knew nothing. And a phone call.
You're calling into...
No, I'm answering.
Oh, you're...
I've developed that
as
skill very well of answering questions about which I know nothing. And a call came in saying, what do you think of the Vatican document on religious liberty, which was huge. And I said, in my ignorance, I think it's really nice for Catholics to think about that. During the commercial break, I was with an Episcopal priest named Murray Kinney. He said to me, you know, you got to get off your pad. You can't answer questions like that. And that was a huge moment. I think I've been trying to get off my pad ever since. And the other thing, in response to your question, when I started reading Paul Ricoeur, I doubt whether I ever understand anything that Paul Ricoeur writes, but I make my own judgments, and I really
get your second naivete.
That's correct, yeah. All that. But what I got from Ricoeur, he had a little essay on Jesus' parables as an act of imagination. That opened the door for imagination for me. And that's been major for me since then. Yeah.
In your most recent book, or one of your most recent books, you say, quote, "The utterance of truth is grossly unwelcome among us." How have you experienced that? How have you seen that?
Well, I've had people walk out during my lectures. I think in our society, we are seduced into a cocoon of American exceptionalism, and we simply will not tolerate anyone calling that into question. And I think that my experience is that liberals are a bit more cool about the way they resist than hot-headed conservatives, but it's the same resistance.
The first book of yours I ever read in seminary, Finally Comes the Poet. I was flipping back through that, and I saw that I had marked a passage in which you note that Daniel and his 3 friends were tempted with success through conformity. And so I was wondering, you obviously are successful. You've done very well.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, in what some ways...
Let me say about my let me say about my yeah. I have. I'm not bragging about that. I know that about myself. Winston Churchill, it's reported, his 8-year-old grandson came and said, "Papa, they say you're the greatest man of the 20th century. Is that true?" And Churchill said, "Yes, now booger off." Excuse me.
So, in that kind of success, what are some of the ways that you have personally experienced or encountered the temptations to power and prestige that you so helpfully write about?
Not power, just prestige.
Yeah.
There's no power comes with what I do. It's seductive to want to be connected to and noticed by the right people. It's seductive to try to angle to get included in the right venues. It's seductive to want to overproduce in some way to vindicate myself. So I am on a good day quite aware of that, and I suppose one of the signs of that is that my schedule is always overfilled, as my wife keeps reminding me, that I think if I do one more good thing, I'll hit the jackpot, whatever that may be. So, I talked to Tony Campola's son, and I asked him if his dad was going to retire. And he said, "Oh, no." He said, "My dad can't retire. He needs a standing ovation twice a week." And I said, so.
One of my favorite teachers as an undergrad, I remember so clearly one day when I was a junior, he said, "No one wants to draw the prophet card, and yet you've made a career out of the prophet card. Surely it's got to be difficult sometimes." And so I wonder, how does one sustain a life of warning of the dangers of affluence and power? Or another way to ask it perhaps is, what kind of sources of either consolation or inspiration have kept you going?
Yeah. I think that I am, this may not sound very convincing, I think I am fed by the text. And I have had such a privileged life that I just get to sit and look at the text. I don't have to do what pastors have to do. I find the text endlessly energizing, And I have lots of contact with people who are in street ministry or ministry with poor people, and they often tell me that my work helps them. That really is an incentive for me to keep at it, because I can imagine that my work has real connections with ministry. I don't think I have ever doubted the truth of the prophetic dimension of faith. My misgivings are, and they're very much on the front burner for me, that I'm a better talker than I am a walker. I'm very aware of that, and I regard myself as under discipline. I think I have grown less shrill about what I think the demands of prophetic faith are, because I cannot bear the shrillness of the demand in my own life. So that's an ongoing, unresolved issue in my life about my use of money, my use of time, my having and not having courage, and all that stuff. And I suppose I'm like you. I take comfort in the conviction that God can use people like us. And I did a lot of years in psychotherapy, and I know a good bit about myself, and I know about that. So that's what I keep processing.
As already noted, Brueggemann was a giant among scholars. More than 100 books, innumerable lectures and interviews, classes taught in seminaries and beyond. His book, The Prophetic Imagination, is reported to have sold more than 1 million copies. This fact alone makes him exceptional among theologians. But more than selling lots of books is the kind of message he articulated: provocative, yet hopeful, devastating in its critiques, yet always winsomely inviting us to imagine a better world, to dare imagine a better world, and then seek to live it by God's grace into existence. But what so impressed me about Walter Brueggemann on each of the 3 or 4 occasions I had opportunity to spend with him was his insistence that his own words interrogate his own life and work too. It moved me always that this giant among scholars could know he had not yet arrived, that even given that he and I and perhaps you have not yet arrived, that he could
take comfort in the conviction that God can use people like us.
Walter Brueggemann was born March 11, 1933. He passed peacefully in Traverse City, Michigan on June 5, 2025, at the age of 92. For his work and witness, his scholarship and his good cheer, his words and his laughter, we give thanks. And we bear witness that God did indeed employ well and beautifully a man like Walter Brueggemann. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our In Memoriam episode on Walter Brueggemann. If you'd like access to the unabridged version of the interviews and lecture on which this episode is based, please visit NSC+. If you're not already a member, you can become a member by going to our website at nosmallendeavor.com and clicking on Join NSC+. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion, and the support of the John Templeton Foundation, whose vision is to become a global catalyst for discoveries that contribute to human flourishing. thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriet Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. And a special thanks to Britt Norville for research prep for one of the interviews in this episode. Britt also helped me learn a great deal more about Walter when, as one of my grad students, he wrote a beautiful master's thesis on Walter Brueggemann and Wendell Berry. Special thanks also to my longtime friend and former colleague, Professor David Fleer, who made possible the opportunity to interview Walter on the 2 occasions shared in this episode. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.